A very good evening to you and welcome to Politics 101. I'm David Hines. Want to welcome everybody this evening to our program. This evening, we are going to be hearing from the political parties. We're going to try to make this a regular feature where the parties of the opposition will be given an opportunity to come on to talk about what they're doing, what uh, the positions and the issues of the day and anything that they would want to talk about. Because, of course, one of the issues that we have had is people complaining that they're not hearing from the political parties. Of course, we've been on lockdown for quite a while. It's now, 2 years since we've been on lockdown. There's word that the lockdown will soon come to an end, and lots of the restrictions are going to be lifted. We'll talk this evening to the representatives of the political party and whether they feel that the time has come or whether it's premature. But we've been on lockdown for these last 2 years, and it's been quite a thing. Political parties have not been able to do much via street activity and so forth. Um, and so we want to talk to them about what they're doing and get their views on what's happening in Guyana. I was making the point yesterday. Yes, it was yesterday. That I just returned from Guyana after about spending 2 weeks, and I was just there 6 weeks before. And every time one goes back to Guyana, one feels as if the place has changed considerably. Given a lot that is going on, a lot in terms of buildings going up here, but it's more than that. It's is that you feel that the society is changing before your very eyes. The flight that I came back on, um, I would say 75% of the people on that flight were non-Guyanese. And I'm not talking about people from the diaspora going in. I'm talking about people from other Latin American countries, it seems, and lots of Americans who I understand go back and forth um, to Guyana. So a lot is changing before our very eyes. And everybody knows that I am very impatient with our people for not recognizing that the society has changed considerably and is changing before our very eyes. That we are an oil nation. Whatever happens, and a lot will happen, we are a new society in the sense that um, things are happening in our country, around our country, about our country, that we are paying scant attention to, and we get bogged down a lot in the back and forth between political parties. I'm not saying that we should not be engaged in that, but we have to understand that if we get engaged entirely on party for party, we will be taken for a ride because things will be happening around us and we wouldn't know. Remember the surprise we were all taken by when we learned sometime around June, I think, that it was regime change taking place in front of our eyes in 2020. We were of course engaged in an election, and we thought it was a normal election between the PPP and the coalition, the PPP and the PNC. We thought it was a normal fight between African Guyanese and Indian Guyanese. And we didn't realize that the world had descended on Guyana and was, in effect, determining the outcome of an election. And I vowed since then that never again should our country um, be be so surprised at what's happening. We have always been part of geopolitics. We have always been part of an empire. Up until 1966, we were part of the British Empire. And what being part of the British Empire meant is that we were part of what's happening in India and Asia, in what's happening in Africa, in what's happening in Britain, what's happening in the wider Caribbean, because we were part of an empire. Our news came from the BBC. And in a sense, there was a benefit from it because, you know, when I traveled for the first time to North America 40 odd years ago, and I was, I think, in a sociology class. This is 1979-80. And I was the only person in the class that knew of a country called Czechoslovakia, partly because of being part of that empire. Being Guyana knew what was happening in Europe. As a boy, we would be given Mississippi and Czechoslovakia to spell at school, that kind of stuff. So we were always part of empire and therefore part of the larger world. And we were the first English-speaking Caribbean country in which the European powers in the decolonization period descended on. Guyana was invaded by Britain in 1953. Its first elected government was overthrown after 133 days. And when I was doing my studies for my PhD, I went into the American archives and I found the letter from the US Secretary of State to his counterpart. I think it was John Foster Dulles, was the US Secretary of State at that time. Dulles International Airport in Virginia is named after him. Found a note from him to his counterpart in Britain saying that we are concerned about British Guyana and urging the British to take action because they felt that Guyana was going to become a communist state. This is before our first self-government, our first government. But I mean, it was just after the election. The Americans are urging the British to invade Guyana. Cuba had not happened yet, you know. In that same year, there was what is called the Moncada attack by Fidel Castro and some of his comrades. And they were captured and put in jail. And then Fidel and them would get out of jail very early, and they would go to Mexico and reorganize to go back into Cuba, ending with the 1959 Cuban Revolution. But before that, Guyana was seen as the Cuba before Cuba. And one of the consequences of that intervention was that the nationalist movement, which was manifested in the People's Progressive Party, which was the first mass-based party in what is now known as Guyana, where Burnham and Jagan were co-leaders, and you had formidable leaders like Sidney King, J.P. Lachman Singh, Mrs. Jagan, Ashton Chase, Martin Carter, Rory Westmus, Clinton Wong, Jane Phillips Gay, to name a few. There are others whose name don't come to mind immediately. That movement was split in two as a result of British intervention. And we have what is now the PPP and the PNC. That's how they came into being. As a result of that intervention by the British, splitting that movement, splitting our ethnic groups, which we have not been able to repair that to this day. The British and Americans were to return in the early 1960s as the Cold War heated up. As the Cold War heated up, they were to return and once again determine what the shape of the next government would be. The People's Progressive Party was not seen as an option because they were seen as too hardline communist. In the end, the British settled for the PNC as the lesser of two evils. The PNC had declared itself socialist, but had not at that time in 1964, been seen as communists, and so they were seen as the alternative. The PNC then, because of a change in the political system, I've been talking a lot about political system on this program, and wherever I get a chance. To get the PPP out there, to change the political system from first past the post to proportional representation, thus allowing the PNC and the United Force to come together and form the government. When I said regime change, I didn't mean that they rigged the election for the PNC or the UF. There was no rigging of the election in that sense. What they did was to rig the system and change the system so that you can have a coalition of two parties. Prior to that, the PPP won the vote, but was able to win the government. And the Americans and British intervened and so on. There was a lot of mass demonstrations and so on and so forth. The Americans were to return at the end of the Cold War in the form of Jimmy Carter, and said we had 3 decades of this and it has to stop now. And again, they helped to broker an agreement between the PNC and the PPP, allowing for a return to transparent elections, which the PPP won. Hamilton Green will go to his grave believing that that election was fixed by Jimmy Carter in favor of the PPP. He and his supporters took to the streets on election day, but Jimmy Carter and the Americans were able to call Mr. Hoyt and ask him to call off that thing. We then found oil in 2015, and by then the Americans returned again. They returned again to be Guyanese, return again. The Americans returned, and this time they joined forces with the PPP because they faced the agonizing question of who will govern in this new era of oil wealth in which American companies are investing billions of dollars. And they again ask who will govern. And for reasons which are becoming more and more evident, they decided that the PPP was the better choice. And they then sought to exploit our porous electoral system, a bloated voters list, people voting while they're not in the country because they're on the list of registrants. And therefore, being on the list of registrants, their ID card comes into play. And so what they were able to use the weak electoral system in order to oust the coalition. I give you that history to say from 1953 to the present, external intervention has been constant in Guyana. Ethnic division has been constant, and authoritarian governance has been constant. The electoral system was changed in '64 to bring about regime change. In 2020, the electoral system was manipulated. They didn't change it, they manipulated the weaknesses. This question about the new voters list is not new. In 2006, the PNC's cry was no voters list, no new voters list, no election. I think that was it. No house registration, no election. So this thing about the voters is goes right back to 2006. The PNC knew in that election the voters list was not fit. 2006 is now, it was 16 years. And the PNC threatened in 2006 not to contest the election. In that year, the PNC did the worst, 34%. The PNC was accustomed at that time to getting about 40% of the vote. They got 34% of the vote in 2006. We are learning from people who were part of the PPP government at the time that it was at that time the PPP looked at migration patterns and they realized that they could not automatically win an election on just ethnic vote. And so they made a decision to exploit and tamper with the electoral system. And they began to do that in 2006. They planted people in GCOM, using the law to put themselves in power. The coalition was able to overcome that in 2015. And remember, in 2015, the PPP said it was the Americans who put the coalition in government. And to this day, the PPP never accepted the results of those elections. Donald Ramotar, the presidential candidate for the PPP, said that he would not accept. They allowed the government to come into power, but they never accepted those results. They thought it was regime change against them. Ramotar will go to Red House last year, October, and warn the PPP about regime change. And so here we are, 2 years after that debacle, after those 5 months. For some people, what happened in those 5 months is already settled. For some of us, no, it's not settled. That what really happened that caused the 5 months is yet to be determined. 2 elections petitions have been filed. Never before in our history have 2 election petitions been so important. We already know some of the evidence thanks to the recount. We already know about boxes which did not contain statutory documents. We already know because the police gave information about people who voted who were not in Guyana. So some of that evidence that is going to come into the elections petition, we already know. And so therefore, those petitions are extremely important. The PPP never speaks about bring it on for those petitions. They don't want the petition, they're trying everything for those petitions not to be heard. When politicians are trying so hard, when politicians are trying so hard to prevent something from happening, take notice. Take notice. So those elections are not concluded. The Americans have given us a hint, 2 hints. The first hint was when they said the government was installed. They tried to pin that on the opposition. And that term was first used by the Americans in their State Department report. They said that the government was installed. They don't like to say that. They say it's the opposition saying that. And then recently, the USAID report said that the elections were disputed. The Americans have given an in. There's that thing not regular. Then big man would say, and in the villages and in the wards of the town. Thing not regular. The government was installed and the elections were disputed. I think sometimes as political people, we are not intentional on what we choose to run with. We should have billboards all over Guyana. Disputed election led to an installed government. Because the other side is, well, they're becoming less and less with that. Only a couple of them are out there talking about the saving of democracy. Comical formulation. It's an assumption that we had this great democracy before, that somebody threatened to derail during those 5 months, and it was saved. So if we had a democracy, it meant the coalition government had to be congratulated. And I have always said that for me, the coalition government was the first non-authoritarian government in our post-colonial history. We've had to deal with authoritarian governance throughout our history. For the first time during those 5 years, 2015 to 2020, opposition people were not systematically harassed. There was no political assassination. People were not prevented from holding public meetings. It was not a perfect government because the authoritarian state remained intact. But the level to which the PPP had taken that state, remember Dr. Thomas talked about the criminalized state. So we had moved from an authoritarian state to a criminalized state where this authoritarian state fused with criminals. So we had moved from the authoritarian state to the criminalized state. What happened to 2015 to 2020 is that criminalized state was toned down. You couldn't bring about fundamental change in the state in 5 years, but at least the fusion between the state and criminals that was disbanded or certainly toned down. Systems were put in place. SARA was put in place to go after those members of the state who had benefited criminally from their position in state and to get back some of the state assets that they had appropriated. Some of them came back and they returned some of the assets. One day, I don't know legally what prevents SARA from speaking out. There might be some legal barriers. But one day when SARA tells its story, it will tell you about some of them who actually said, yes, we benefited from state assets, and some of them started to return their assets. It's why when the PPP came in, one of the first things they did was to close down SARA. So the previous government had begun to reform the state. But the state in those 5 years remained by and large an authoritarian state. But the leaders had some sense of political morality. Supporters of the coalition cussed the coalition for not locking up the PPP when they had evidence as a result of the commissions of inquiry. But they didn't move to lock up the PPP, although they had the legal instruments to do that. So there was a sense that the leaders of that government were not as blatant and were not cruel were not insensitive as the ones we have now. The ones we have now have the same instruments of power, and just as a whiff, they began locking people up left, right, and center, going back to the hyper authoritarian state. And so we have to know our history. We have to know our political history. My frustration, one of my frustrations, is that we have political activists on both sides of the fence today who do not take time to study, who do not take time to read, who do not take time to understand their own people. In my time, we had to wake up at 2, 3 in the morning and go to political classes. The PPP had their Akrobe political school. The PNC had their political school. The WP had its political school. We had to read and study our country. Today, people walk off the road and become political activists and have not a sense of their own country. They are going to make mistakes. If you don't understand your country, you don't understand your country's place in the world, and you don't understand the historical trajectory of the society, and worse, if you don't understand the political culture, that is your people's attitude to politics, you'll make mistakes. They say that we come on these programs and we cause trouble and we urge people to bring down the government and all kinds of foolishness. I know from my standpoint, my program, this program, our program, is aimed at exactly what we try to do every day. We try to inform people, and we try to turn that information into a form of education, and we try to turn that education into a form of mobilization. Because mobilization is not just mobilizing people for street activity. There are all kinds of political activity that one mobilize people. Ideas, political ideas are as important as political street fighting. Big ideas. Some of them are bad ideas. Nazism was a bad idea, but it's big ideas. What they're fighting in Ukraine there is over the big idea. Who should control Europe? Russia is talking about the motherland. America is talking about its historical right based on manifest destiny. America's tentacles all over the world, America coming into Guyana or wherever it goes into, is not because America is greedy, so goes the story. It is because God has endowed Americans with a special talent. They and they alone know how to keep the world safe, how to keep the world productive. That is manifest destiny, a big idea. And we sometimes play around with ideas. Oh, you all talk too much. It's another talk shop David Hines have there. Big ideas, whether it's Pan-Africanism, whether it's non-alignment, whether it's a cooperative republic, big ideas matter. And we play around sometimes. Our foreparents used to sit under those trees at night and plan. And that is why when they were able to seize their power in 1838, within a matter of months, they were buying lands and creating villages. It didn't drop from the sky. They had been imagining that. The creative intellect and the creative imagination. They didn't go to universities, but they had a sense of ideas. what it means to be a free human being. That is why they were able to get out of that plantation and create villages and they leave that lasting legacy for us, the humanization of the wild coast. And the coast, every now and again, the wildness of the coast returns. And we have to tame that wild coast as our foreparents did. And we're going to tame it by ideas and action. Ideas come out of action, and action come out of ideas. There is a relationship between the two. All you all do is talk, according to some of our people, Caribbean people, yak, 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 yak. As David Rudder said, that is the root of our problem. Ideas lead to struggle, lead to action, and out of that action come fresh ideas. Let nobody tell you all about this thing that you all talk too much. Talk. Ideas are extension of action. As you're pushing back, as you're protesting, you're leaving footprints in the sand for others to follow. Good night. Welcome to Politics 101. I've given my piece, and now it's time for my guests to come in and have their say. Tonight, we have members of the three opposition parties. People's National Congress is going to be represented tonight by young Vice Chairman, Mr. Sherwin Holder. No stranger to this program. When he was running for his position, I made it clear that I thought this young man has places to go. It was not my business. I didn't belong to the PNC, so I couldn't vote. And I should not have been meddling in the party's business. But I saw a young talent, and I said, here is a young talent. I hope he does well today. He's the second most powerful leader in the PPPs. Welcome, Sherwin.
Good day, Dr. Hines. Thanks for having me. Thanks for those kind words.
Thank you so much, my brother. Takumo Gunse, my big brother from the WPA. I came into politics as a little boy in the 70s, listening to Takumo Gunse, Sase Omo, and Walter Rodney, and Clive Thomas, Rupner Ryan, Josh Ramsamy, Walter Rodney, Yussi Kwayana, Andaye, Bonita Bone, and others coming to boxing and speaking at the line top. And my political upbringing has been influenced largely by these people who took a different view of our independence in the 1970s, who challenged the established parties to say, what is this independence going to be? Is it going to be rum mixed with brandy? Is it going to be rum mixed with water? Or is it going to be the real deal? And we know that we had that concourse of ideas, that struggle between the left radicals and the governments all over the Caribbean, not just Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica, Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Vincent. We had that period. The Komogon has been a regular in recent times. I don't know if Hemraj Ramjatan is, yes, Hemraj. Hemraj is an old timer. We're about the same age, and Hemraj I first heard of in the PYO, heard of someone who was prepared in those days to challenge the orthodoxy of the PPP's ideology. I mean, some of us were saying, you know, all the parties, all the three major parties in those days were, you know, some kind of Marxism. The PPP was Marxist-Leninist. Sorry, The PNC was Marxist-Leninist. The PPP was communist. The WPA called itself independent socialist. And everybody accepted. And it's a real strange place. We have never had a real conservative party that helps with the UF, talked about a little bit of capitalism back in the 60s. It was more about mercantilism and people buying and selling and so on. But Kamraj was one of the first persons in the people to begin to raise questions about the nature and the degeneration of that working class commitment. I noticed Donald Ramotar and others are now saying that the PPP has moved away from being a working class party, Kamraj. And then he said that 20, 30 years ago. Brothers, thank you all very much. And I'm a little bit talkative tonight, the little teacher in me. And I think the audience sometimes needs the background. So what we're going to be tonight, we're going to be talking about what the parties have been doing. Because in effect, this is the APNU AFC year, right? With all due respect to the other components of the APNU, the APNU was really the WPA and the PNC, really. And once the WPA withdrew, the APNU was over. I mean, for all intents and purposes. And then once you had that formulation, we move to the APNU AFC. So in a sense, what we have represented here is the coalition. Let me talk at you. I understand that they're going to be removing all the restrictions, the COVID restrictions, in another couple of weeks. What's your party take on it? Is it premature? Is it time that those restrictions are removed?
Thank you, Dr. Hines. Yes, we think that it's premature. Any such decision has to be guided by facts, by statistics. And I don't think we've seen the statistics which suggest that there should be a full opening of the country. I understand this economic situation and so forth, but any decision taken has to be guided by irrelevant statistics, which should suggest that it is safe to reopen the country and drop all these guardrails that were put in place to protect the citizens of this country from COVID. We've noticed over the last few weeks that we haven't been really seeing any updates as to the hospitalization and deaths from the COVID-19 disease. So, I get the sense that it's a deliberate act over a period of time. It's very systemic. And this is what it has led to. This was always the intention. What we notice is that this government is taking its lead from developed countries like Europe, countries in Europe like Switzerland and the other very developed countries. What they're not considering is our specific situation, our particular situation here in Guyana. We don't have the kind of systems and mechanisms in place to ensure that the citizens are well protected. I can tell you this, I spoke with some persons in Switzerland just recently, and I believe they removed the requirement for wearing masks. And that resulted in a lot of persons who would have contracted COVID before, contracting it again in a mere matter of weeks. So I'm yet to be guided by the statistics, by the facts which inform this decision.
Thank you. Let me bring in Kamraj, because Kamraj was one of the architects of those measures that eventually were put in place. He was the Minister of Public
Security,
and was very much part of it. Kemraj, are we moving too fast?
I want to believe so. Look, this is going to be a difficult question to answer if you don't have the statistics. And I must say that the government has been somewhat sketchy with the statistics, because we used to get it before, and of course we don't have anybody there at the committee, the COVID committee. So I have not been brought. But what I am seeing internationally is that even in America, more patients with COVID are now flocking back to hospitals. And inside of Europe, there has been an upsurge of COVID. And the Omicron virus, the variant, especially. And for us to simply go back to almost full-fledged openness is not going to be the correct thing, in my opinion. But I and my party is telling the public, please do the mitigation measures. Don't go into big crowds. We are urging them with that. Wear your mask, and especially ensure that you wash your hands and the sanitizing that is necessary and so on. Because quite frankly, I am not so certain. And I want to say that even when we had the statistics too, the doctors that we have our advice from, and one is an extraordinarily qualified one from New York, Dr. Sumar, he has indicated to me that those statistics, you multiply by 2, the deaths and even the hospitalizations and then the problems with lungs and all of that. That is a neater way of knowing what is the reality, because it is always under score, the under that I'm looking for here. It is something that is not properly statistized. Properly, the numbers is a little bit under as against the real thing. So we feel that this should not have been the case. And soon as they're now thinking about this, we see in the European countries, and we got people coming in from America and all over the place still. The flights are in and so on. So we are going to catch it from some other country if we don't. And Brazil is the same problem. So I think we were a little too premature. Yes, I will give that opinion.
Before I go to Ogun, Kemraj, I've had you on so many times, but we have never really talked about those early days when you knew nothing. All you knew is that this thing was taking over the world, and going back to February, March of 2020. And you had to deal with that situation as a small country that is vulnerable to these global interventions. Tell us what was it like during that period? What was the method you guys used to decide how you are going to handle this stuff?
Well, the method, we had to get the advice, and we wanted it from the best sources. And because quite frankly, we didn't know much about it. And so we asked the PAHO people and the WHO, and then the CARICOM specialist. We had our Minister of Finance, I think it was Walter Lawrence then, who was also in communication with them all the time. And we had a set of doctors in Guyana that we relied on through the Ministry of Health. And as best as possible, all that we could have done based on their advice, tightening down the border areas in the interior, doing the curfews, knowing very well that Guyanese hated curfews. We had to tell them, and ensuring that the police also get into the act of enforcing the regulations. We charged quite a lot of people, especially when they were playing the fools with themselves and with the other members of community who they could have caused to get the contract the disease. And so it had to be a lot of encouragement. I think it was a 3 E's, the president said: education and then enforcement. And it worked. because we realized with the deaths that were happening all over the world and in Guyana that we had to be very, very assertive, and we had to be almost draconian. And it was some businessmen come trying to lobby us and so on, that their business. We said, look, take your profits will come later on, but let us look after these hospitalizations, these cases. Let us lessen it. And that is why we closed down literally at very early hours in the evening, a whole lot of places, some of whom tried, very, very well to go and break the law, violate it, and we locked them up. As a matter of fact, a number of people were locked up. And then that's, kind of helped those public relations stunts too, taking people off the seawall when they were gathering in large gatherings here and trying to break them up and so on. All of that helped because they said that they didn't realize we meant business. And that is how you got to do this thing. Otherwise, so many people will die, so many hospitalization, which has a tremendous economic cost, and then stress for your nurses and your doctors. And so that is why we had to close down schools and everything, And I think we made the right decision. And that's how you got to deal with these things. Public health issues.
We hope reopening the country is concerned.
That's dangerous.
Ogunse, can you? Yes.
Okay, I want to join with my colleagues and in saying that I think, and we in WPA feel it's premature to open up the country back in the way in which the government seems to be suggesting. I also want to join with them in expressing our concerns about the reliability and the absence of the scientific information, because all over the world, success in defeating this virus is guided by science. And in Guyana, we haven't been doing good in terms of identifying and doing a lot of trace, like how in China, those countries, they track down, persons who are affected in COVID. They try to find all the possible contacts they may have made, during a given time. We have not done any of that, in my mind, as far as I know, to any significant effect. Therefore, one could assume that we don't have a good understanding of the gravity of the virus in the society. I haven't seen recently what is the government judgment in terms of our national immune development and tolerance to the virus, because all of those are important indicators as to how to deal with the virus. But what I find very interestingly, even China, which countries in the world agree, given its population size and the fact that the virus, apparently raised its head in China in a remarkable way, they have been doing fairly well. In fact, they have less deaths than most of the developed countries in the world and so forth, and they have contained the virus. But recently, we are hearing about, an increase in COVID in China, unprecedented increase by their standards. So this virus is demonstrating that it's not yet defeated. And it has the capacity to resurrect its head. If it could do that in places like China, I can't see why it wouldn't do that in places like Guyana, who is less equipped both scientifically and in terms of our medical resources and institutions to deal with this kind of a pandemic. But what I find of great disappointment, well, I shouldn't even call it disappointment given the nature of the PPP. But one would have thought that the PPP came under a lot of criticism on the way in which they seek to manage this COVID problem. And I think that if the government was serious, it should have convened a meeting of national stakeholders and report the government assessment of the situation and to try to reach some consensual agreement on how we will reopen up, bearing in mind, what we see is happening in the world and bearing in mind what the World Health Organization is saying, and so forth and so forth. I thought they would have, a different government would have used this opportunity to bring, more national understanding and consensual agreement on how to open up the country. But the PPP treats Guyana like its personal property, and they continue the dictatorial approach on these matters, which creates unnecessary problems on national issues, which ought not to be very problematic, because our approach to a pandemic like this one, by its very nature, should trigger cooperation, and national cohesion in terms of defeating the virus. But the PPP is hell-bent on being the PPP. And I think that we have to, I don't like to behave like a person who believes in the religious approach to these matters. But we really have to keep our hands crossed if they do go forward to open up the country. And we always know that what is driving the PPP is they're trying to facilitate the economic interests of that important constituency in the business sector that support them in the last elections, and they have a big indebtedness to them. But they seem to prepare to sacrifice the national interests to achieve the partisan interests. So I want to say that we have to hope that when they do what they seems to be bent on doing, we just have to hope that the country, for the interest of the country, that the virus don't raise its head once again and don't raise its head in a more vicious way. But we, the WPA, believe that we should have opened up the country in a more cautious way.
In a more cautious way. Takumo Ogunse, executive member of the WPA. Certainly, gentlemen, politics is an outdoor sport, if you may call it that. And these last 2 years have had a tremendous effect on outdoor activity as far as political campaigning is concerned. One of the good things about it is that we have developed new media, such as this one, but notwithstanding what we do here, really at the end of the day, politics is about meeting people, rubbing the flesh, engaging in speaking and listening. Sherwin, how has that affected the PNC? You are a large party, and whenever people out there are talking about more street activity, your party come under the most pressure because you are the big party. How has this pandemic affected political work?
Thank you, David. It certainly has. As you rightfully indicated, there is a general expectation from supporters that you will be more in the fields and more on the ground. In fact, we campaign to be more on the ground and in the fields and meeting persons face to face. So it's challenging. It's quite challenging, but we're adapting to it. We've embraced technology. We engage a lot on Zoom and the other platforms. Of course, we have these platforms where we can also disseminate information on these various programs. In our party, we have a number of persons who control media programs. And so we use that to disseminate our information. We use other technology, other applications, WhatsApp and all the other applications to disseminate our information to the public. But as you rightfully said, nothing beats that face-to-face arrangement. And so we've been trying our best to be on the ground and while at the same time try to adhere to the COVID guidelines and the COVID rules, etc. But certainly it has posed a challenge for us. But on the bright side, I believe that it has forced us as a party and as a country as a whole to embrace these new technologies and these new ideas. You no longer have to wait, to So until everybody come who has to go to work, who has different things to do at home and that kind of thing, and can't make a meeting in the flesh, you can now, have it on Zoom. So if there are advantages that we capitalize on. But again, some of these issues we just have to be on the ground to get a real feel of what is going on. It cannot happen from in the office here. You must be on the ground, and people want to feel you and have that face-to-face exchange. You don't have. There's a wider public that doesn't. In this age and time, a lot of persons use this social media platform, WhatsApp, and so. But there's a large contingent that still don't have a cell phone or don't have the type of phones that have these kind of technology. So that's certainly something that we're looking at, and you have to get out in the fields to reach those particular groups.
Mm-hmm. I know that last year around July, August, your party had been going out on Sundays, on the weekends, going quietly into the villages. I know that because sometimes we would turn up in a village and they say, Kemraj and David and Cathy, they just leave here, especially in the East Berbice and West Berbice area. We turn up to eat at a shop, AFC man shop. And he said, you all just miss them boys here. I don't know how much you were able to continue that, but I'll ask you the same question. How this period of lockdown, how has it negatively and positively affected your party's political mobilization?
Well, I will tell you, it has affected it negatively because a lot of the people are being bombarded by a lot of the meetings on the ground and on social media by the PPP and on the various radio stations and TV stations that their news are carried on. And being in the government, they also have some extra time with the various news broadcasts and newspapers. But we tried as best to do the outreaches, as we caught up a couple of times in Berbice when we were there. But I think that we still have to do so much more. And notwithstanding the crisis of a COVID, the people want to hear our narrative. The people are being bombarded by the PPP's narrative. And the PPP, if you didn't know that, is a political machine that is very well oiled. It is well oiled in the Hindu community and by certain Muslim brethren now that getting some big contracts and all of that by the Muslim community. I am amazed that when I went to some of those meetings that we caught up there or we missed you, they're saying it, that these friends and family with the big money that are now getting all the contracts, they also come and they talk at the masjid, they talk at the mandirs. And they want that base to be kept intact, notwithstanding, as the people are now asking of us, that we must be there to talk about some of the economics, the high cost of living that the COVID caused, the high cost of living and, the bad situation that the floods of last year caused, especially to the rice farmers. And today, because of paddy prices going down, the hardships that they're now feeling. And so we really got to get down there. But the PPP also are telling some of these people that if you use your bottom house, we gonna mark you. And they got some real renegade PPPites. And that is why the AFC's job is a little difficult in these areas, because they mark back the people. They got some people who I would have gone to their homes in 2005 when we started off this movement that said, Kemraj, it's a little difficult now because then next thing, when we went there to two homes at West Berbice outreach, bricks start fall upon the rooftop nighttime. They know it's who, but they know it's because Ramjatan and David Patterson been there. These PPP fellas are rotten to the core, and they do not want any different narrative to reach, especially their quarters or what they feel that they get transport over. And so we have to understand that. I talk to them on the phone. We have an office. We try as best as possible to get some people at the office to come and talk to them. Some of them, because I'm in practice now, a lot of them come in and saying, this is the problem and that is the problem, and they want some legal advice. You're helping out. But I think we have to do lots more groundwork to get them to understand, and we have to come up with our policies too. Because when you go there, they're getting conscious, and they're of the view that what are you going to do about it? All right, we hear that this is what is the problem. What are you going to do about it? And so that is why we have to far more articulating the policies of the day as to what we're going to do about the paddy prices and so on. And you have to start thinking of the better water management. You got to start thinking about a variety that is going to give, instead of 45 bags per acre, about 60 bags. Nari got to be supported. And all of these long-term plans, you got to tell them about. And then they say, well, that is good. That is good ideas. And once they then realize that you are talking sense rather than the crap the PPP goes and tell them, they say, yeah, Mr. Rambutan, thank you very much. And that's how you do your politics. Because you just don't go to the people to give pie in the sky. Are we going to build one bridge? Are we going to build the road now for Ketch Rosignal and all kinds of infrastructural works they're telling them? Are we going to create 50,000 house lots? Are we going to create 50,000 jobs? Because quite frankly, the people on the ground from the meetings that we have had, and I told you that we have not gone very many places because of the COVID and a whole set of other difficulties, they're telling us that, look, we don't want to hear all what they're going to do with the oil money. We want to feel the oil money in our pockets, in our belly, and we are not feeling it. And that is what is beating the PPP today. That notwithstanding all this propaganda that they put to the people and how they fool them up the last elections and so on, the people are comparing our 5 years, as you just did, the coalition's 5 years, with lots of what is happening now, and saying that them fellas, this continue from where they left off in 2015, just before the 2015 loss of the PPP. They gone back into the thieving, methods, and friends and family and favorites, the 3 Fs. And this is how they doing this thing. So it is fertile ground for us to now go out there and tell them what we have in store and what good we did. And of course, I think that is going to help. But in view of difficulties here, we got to do this. Political Sherrod Duncan is very effective, a very wide viewership. We do the Burbies program still, and we're not going to stop that because the Burbicians are seeing that. I'm trying to expand now to the Essequibo to have a weekend program or a midweek program in Essequibo. But we got to get some monies too. Is very important because these television stations charge $35,000-$40,000 per hour and so on.
Yeah. Takuma, if you can come in, I mean, your party is a third party, just like AFC, and tell us what your party have been doing during the COVID period, and how was that period affected your party's work?
I think objectively, the only party that benefited from the COVID pandemic is the PPP. I mean, all the other political parties on the opposition experience the negative aspect of the pandemic, because what is critically important in politics, and especially given the way in which the elections played itself out, mobilization on the ground and having that direct contact with your constituents was an important ingredient to counterbalance or to restrain PPP excesses. And because the pandemic prevent us from doing work on the ground, okay, the PPP, had an easy run, and they took full advantage of it. We in the WPA, in the very early parts of the pandemic, and since it originated just at the end of the 2020 elections, coincided with 2020 elections, we have been using a lot of that time to re-examine the party and to try to work out what is necessary in terms of the party internal and external changes that we need to do to make the party more relevant and more effective to the present political challenge. So we have been doing quite a lot of internal work, trying to keep our memberships both abroad and in Guyana, affair with the thinking of the party. And we have a very important activity which we will indicate to the nation in the near future. Now, we also, like other parties, have been using the social media. And for the WPA, we were very grateful that Brother Kodaki Amsterdam and Brother David Hines was able to develop these two important means of communication, because the WPA have suffered over the years from victimization in the conventional press. It was very difficult for us to sustain any significant and important national discourse through the newspapers and the electronic media, except in the case of Channel 9 on the program which we do every week with the Walter Rodney Groundings. So the pandemic, on the positive side, created these two new channels, Kodaki Boxer Morning and Dr. Hines Politics 101, which give the party a tremendous affray to large sections of the country, the diaspora, that we would not have normally probably have. So I think that is one of the positive sides of it. On this question of the shutting down and reopening up, it for us is a kind of bittersweet. On the one hand, the WPA is keen for the pandemic to pass so that we could get on the ground and to engage the population and to promote our line of thinking in terms of what we think the country needs to go. Even before the elections, when we began keeping a number of community meetings, both privately in private residence and at the street corner public meetings, it built right up to the elections campaign and throughout the elections campaign, when we act as WP as distinct from the coalition. We had promised the people to return to them very soon after the elections, and the pandemic prevented us from doing that. And we are very eager to reach a point where we could re-engage the population in a way which we feel is critical to the political outcome at this historical juncture. While we are comfortable with the inroads that we made with the new electronic avenues, we're not satisfied that in itself is enough. And we are preparing, to revisit the ground, and to begin that ground mobilization, which we believe is important to us as a party, and we believe is important to the opposition and the country at large.
Thank you very much, Brother Tokumo Ogunsi of the Working People's Alliance. Chairman, let me bring you in here. Your leader, Aubrey Norton, new leader of the PNC, is on an extended tour in North America. There have been some reports in the newspapers and other parts of the media about some public meetings that he has been holding. If you can you all give us a sense of, apart from the public meetings, what else? He and Vice Chairman Vince Roy, Jordan, what have they been doing apart from the public meeting? And are you satisfied that the party has been able to take a step forward as a result of the tour to North America?
Yeah, thank you, David. Yes, I'm happy. We're very happy with what our leader has been doing. I think it speaks volumes of the kind of person he is for just after 3 months being on the ground all across the country and then even abroad, engaging our supporters and members there in the US. Basically, what he's doing there is the same that he's been doing across the country, meeting with the membership, meeting with supporters in an attempt to unify the party and bring the party together and put it back on good footing where it was many years ago. So that is part of the objective, to restructure, reorganize the party and mobilize the base, mobilize our supporters, inform them of what the party has been doing, first of all, what is our agenda, and what has been happening on at the wider scale in the country. And so that is his mission out there. And he's been doing a very good job in terms of doing that. Additionally, he's been meeting with officials in the US, various officials. He has also been meeting with persons who wants to contribute to the party, donors. So an important part of his visit is also to raise funds. Funds are very essential in the running of any political party. We need money. And so he's out there raising funds with donors, meeting the diplomatic committee, meeting other officials out there, and carrying our message of the kind of Guyana that we would like to see, our plans for when we get back into government, and to expose what is currently occurring in Guyana, what exactly the PPP has been doing in terms of their dictatorial behavior, the lack of inclusive governance and bad governance altogether, amongst a number of other areas. So that is essentially what he's been doing, and we're very satisfied with what he's done on this trip. It's coming to a close, but we're quite happy with what has been achieved via his visit to the US.
Thank you, Kemrat. The AFC is a third party. It was part of the coalition, and we know what has been the experience of third parties in Guyana. We have had our moments, we have seized them, and then the politics move on. Your party is now almost 20 years old. You came into existence in 2005, so you would have been there for 17 years. What are the lessons of the experience of third party? You've been out of government and you've been in government. Give us a sense of the difficulties, but also the areas in which you think that as a third party, you've made a difference. You're muted. You're muted. We're still not hearing you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, well, it is essentially getting or attracting and appealing largely the people who do not feel satisfied by the two larger parties. And that is where the tap-in is. And I want to say that we benefited from the constitutional structure that we have, which is PR. I remember going to Trinidad to give a short address there at the UNC's meeting. Or was it not the UNC? It was the third party that was being formed there. And telling them that in a first past the post system, third parties might not have long lives at all. And that is why I think we had, and it is part of the strategy of myself and Rafael and Sheila and so on, knowing that we have a PR system, knowing that we have, a section of the people in Guyana who wanted a third way, as it were. And that is where we made the tap in. And we got 5, 7, 12, and now 9 seats in Parliament. It was one of the parties that did probably some record breaking in the Caribbean, because third parties do not live lives like that in the sense. But it is also because there is also a set piece inside of constituencies which like to hear certain attractive things or new things, and just for the newness of it, or the novelty of it, the novelty of the personalities, the novelty of the youthfulness of the party, and so on, they give it a shot. But that could also be its weakness, because what really matters for political parties' lives that want to endure has to be policies and a progressive agenda that is made up of certain ideological underpinnings. Like if you're going to have a free market, if you're going to have, you don't like communism, but an ethical kind of capitalism that people like Paul Collier and Stiglitz talks about, and even the other well-known economists of the day, and so many other philosophers of modern day philosophers that talk about them. So where justice and good governance rather than government, we need more good governance now than government, as it were. And that is what we talked about. And I think that was very attractive. And that is what we have to continue to talk about. An equal society, one where the common fortunes, like with the oil wealth and all of that, will be properly distributed. And I find that, once you talk those things, that will be the strength of a third party. Now, the other parties will talk about it, especially the PPP will talk about it and so on. But as I have been saying for some time now, the support camps, even inside of the PPP bases, have been saying that, but we are not feeling it in our pocket. We are not seeing things improving. They got some friends of mine that came into this country and said after the elections, in 2020, and said we haven't seen any major improvements in and around Georgetown. They got caught up in the congested traffic and so on. What is being done about all of that? And so, it is that. But the most important part of it is getting the leadership of these parties down on the ground, talking these new things, new ideas, and coming up and articulating policies. And we'll have a long life once we do that. The commitment has to be there also from the second-tier leadership. It is necessary that within the regions that where we have regional councillors, and we, since we got into, as a party in 2005 into the parliament, we have had regional councillors that we have managed to win in every region of this country. Region 1, we had gotten since 2005, 1 regional councillors. And so at that level too, at the regional level, we have to ensure that the commitment is there for those people that we selected to be there, to ensure that groups are there, or at least our newsletter. We haven't come out with one very recently, but these things are shown to them that the AFC is still alive and well and kicking very hard. I know that we kick very hard, more than our weight in the parliament and outside of the parliament too, because we have a pretty bright bunch. I know that. So it is important that we continue to do these things. The minute you don't do it, you find that the narrative is taken up, a vacuum is created, and the narrative is taken up by what the nonsense the PPP will want to say that they're doing or what they will do, But we also have to rely on the press. And I must say that the Stabroek has been very kind in its editorial, in my perspective, as to making comparisons as to what happened under our regime as against what is happening now and what the PPP is continuing to do. And we have to ensure that those things are circulated to the membership. It's a lot of work. This political work isn't easy. And I'm glad that I was trained by people like Janet Jagan and Chedi Jagat. That party's tradition, very well-oiled political machinery, getting its work done, I think I've benefited plenty from that. And you got to do it now in the AFC. But sometimes, David, you're feeling old too. You got Grand Picnic and so on now. So you want time for play with them. And out of government, you want to have back a practice and so on in your legal practice. And so the time again is sometimes not there at a personal level. But we have all our parliamentarians around the place, and they're touching corners, and that is what we need. We need them to do some more work. And we only did, coming to this program, we had a management committee meeting talking about all these things. We too are going to have our national conference where there will be a renewal of our leadership and so on. People will come back from the various regions or delegates and have like what the PNC and the PPP call Congress. We call it National Conference. So we will have about 200-300 delegates there that will then select the new leadership of the party for the next 2-year term and so on. And all of this requires monies. And quite frankly, when you're out of government, some of the fellas, they don't come up with the kind of donations that that you would think that they would come up with. But we are managing because, of course, we have the capacity to find the monies to run our political party. So I think a lot of people say AFC dead. Oh, them dead. Not bother with them dead. Well, we're going to have elections. We can have elections and people are going to see what it is. But I can tell you that a lot of people are afraid, in the PPP that is, are afraid of the AFC. Very much afraid what the capacity they have and how to manage to appeal to voters inside of their base. And that is where we have to emphasize our efforts.
Very much, Kemraj. And certainly, we are not a society, we're not a country that does regular polling. So right. You don't really get a sense. People assume the big parties, because they are the big parties, they have support. But third parties, the level of support cannot be green because we're not a country of polling. To come over and say you are also WPA, like the AFC, came into being at a certain historical juncture. Like the AFC, you've been pronounced dead so many times. No, I think there's been no more discussed party, including the big parties at WPA over the years. Tell us, you said that you all have been meeting and talking about trying to find a space for the relevance of the party. And Kemraj made a passionate case as for the continued relevance of the AFC. The WPA, is it still relevant?
I think the WPA is more relevant than ever, but I don't want to start there. I want to point out that the WPA is an older party than the AFC, and we is a party that was birthed in a period when elections, was not a feasible means to changing government. And it is in that environment that the WPA blossomed into the national consciousness in the most profound way. And it is in that kind of politics which requires sacrifice and commitment from the leadership and the cadre and the masses that we did our best. Now, once we enter into electoral politics, the party have not done well in electoral politics, partly because of the racial polarization that returned with the fair and free elections in '92, and partly because the WPA as a genuine working class party of the poor and the powerless, with no connections with business, whether internally or externally. There is nobody who financed the party that can make a political claim in the party. The only people who can make a political claim in the party is the ordinary working people who had brought the energies to the party, and they have very little finances, but they had the energies which they brought to the party and helped build the party. But electoral politics is a different animal. It requires, first and foremost, it requires strategic connections at the center of the society with people who have power and influence, who control the medium. And the WPA was blocked out to the media and given bad media coverage very deliberately as part of the hostility against the party, what the party stands for. And then when you add to that our financial inability to compete with the other parties, because elections in Guyana is a big multi-million-dollar project, and no party is able to raise that kind of money solely from the membership. A lot of the money that enter into these electoral parties come from the business sector, internally and externally, and other political interests who, through all kinds of NGOs and other kinds of groups, find ways to finance parties that they find favor with on the ground. And we were never a beneficiary of that. So electoral politics for us has not been a very bright light. Earlier, we, more than any other political party, in terms of electoral politics, had moved to alliance politics, where after 1992 elections, subsequent elections, WPA entered into alliances with the Guyana Labour Party. We entered into alliance with the Paul Hardy, the Amerindium Party. The name I can't remember now, but the point I'm trying to make there is that we recognize as a small party that coalition politics among small parties is probably one way to have small parties, have a say, an important say in the electoral process. But we saw even with that, the polarization, the racial polarization, even wiped that out. So fast forward to our most recent engagement in the coalition with the APMU, AFC. The WPA felt that we did what we had to do, but we don't believe that electorally it pays to our advantage. I think our major coalition party partner treated us in such a contemptuous way that it didn't bring resources, help to bring resources and this critical space that the WPA and other smaller parties within the APMU needed in order to consolidate their electoral base, in the country, was not facilitated. In fact, our major party treated us like if we were the enemy, that we have to be contained, rather than the PPP have to be contained. So electoral politics to date has not been a great success story for the WPA. But we believe that given the commitment of the country to electoral politics, that the WPA has to stay politically engaged and has to try to see how best we could, with our limited human and financial resources, improve our electoral showing. And for us, we are really thinking hard on what is the path past lack of financial resources. There must be something, party like the WPA could do, conscious that you don't have financial resources, that could trigger you into the political consciousness of the country, that could be converted into electoral support when the elections come. And I think there is where our best minds has been preoccupied. I don't want to say where we are in that judgment, because obviously it's political intelligence. But the WPA feel that we have learned quite a lot from electoral politics, and because we had the advantage of being involved in non-electoral politics, we are probably better placed than most small parties to really understand, the political realities in this hard, difficult political environment of race, ideology, money, corruption, and so forth and so forth. I'm not hear you, David.
Sherwin, are you still with us? Yes, Sherwin is still with us. I was muted. Sherwin, before you go, the big news out there is the current rise in prices of certain items. We saw the rise in price of flour, for example, as a result of the war that is going on right now. And the countries face once again with having to deal with these steep rise in prices and the incapacity of the Chinese people to find the money to buy things in the market. What is your party proposing as a short-term means of dealing with this new rise in prices?
Thank you, David. It's a complex question. There is no one solution or a golden solution to it. What I want to say initially is that over the last 2 years, outside of this period, the PPP has shown incompetence in their management of the economy, in their handling of the economy from the moment they came to power. We expect in the PNCR, and we have been advocating, if not the parliamentary level, that there is a greater focus by the government on agriculture. We're an agriculture nation. Instead, we see a shift towards oil and gas, strictly towards oil and gas, and no real comprehensive policy in dealing with agriculture. I believe that is one of the first areas that the PPP government or any government needs to focus on. Agriculture, growing more food. That is, that is basic. That is very, very basic. That being said, there are a number of measures that can be used to ease the strain on the public. The PPP now has a whole new industry, the oil and gas industry. Lots more money there available. They're even benefiting now, currently, as we speak, from the high prices of oil. So they have much more money at their disposal to bring certain relief, especially to the poor and the working poor. And that is what we have been advocating for the last couple of months, especially in the last couple of months since this new leadership came to power within the PNCR. You will recall that in the last budget, we asked that the government look at the tax threshold and increase it to $125,000. I believe Kemrad's party also contributed, and Kemrad said around 100,000. We said 125,000, because when we did the math and we look at the costs to buy your groceries, to pay your bills, to deal with your rent and all these other expenses, it amounts to somewhere over $100,000. And so we thought that one of the immediate relief that could have been brought to the working poor is that measure. You could have increased that tax threshold, and that would have broadened the number of persons that with their salaries, that lower bracket, that no taxes were removed taken out from their salaries. There are a number of other measures that can be put in place. I hear you mention flour, and there are proposals out there that you could, ease the tax on the wheat. For example, if fuel prices, of course, they could look at ways and means of bringing that down, cooking gas, etc. You can look at generally how to ease the cost of these basic items, and that is the approach. But agriculture, I believe agriculture is essential, and there are a host of other measures where they could, ease the tax, because they have the cash at hand. But instead, what you find this government is opting to do is to use the oil money, use this excess cash to give handouts, to give hampers. Just just a few days ago, you had Minister Dharmalal in the Pomeroon sharing out hampers once again. But you get a sense from being on the ground amongst the people, you get the sense that that only works for a short while. When that is done, then it's back to square one. You're still under the same pressure. You would note that the rice farmers are now have now joined the bandwagon in protesting. Their case is very, very straightforward, and I laid it out on Sherrod's show about 2 days ago. What look, in 2015 we inherited, I must state, we inherited a similar situation in other times. It was very, very similar to what is happening now. You had major protests across the country. People are unhappy, and especially these rice farmers. It's the same situation now. We came in, we managed the economy better to a great extent. We had a number of markets. We opened up new markets. We increased the production, the productivity of the industry, and a host of other measures. And so the paddy price, we create that condition so that the farmers could have gotten better prices for their paddy due to the number of markets, lucrative markets, and so. So while the price rose to about $3,000 during our time, from a meager $1,900 or so, if my memory serves me right, we increased that. The price went up to about somewhere $2,800 to $3,000. That worked for that period, 2015 to 2020. But now under these circumstances, with a high cost of living, that's one. With the fertilizer moving from $5,000 all the way to $10,000, that created extra strain for these farmers. Labor costs to shine the field, to spray the paddy, spray the rice for bug, spray the chemicals, to shine fertilizer, all the labor costs went up as a result of the cost of living. You have also the cost to plow the fields and to reap also went up. So all these things coupled together is creating a terrible situation for farmers. And I did some math on it because it's basic mathematics. It costs to a farmer about somewhere about $85,000, and it could be more in some cases, because if you have flooding, it will cost you more. If you don't have water available, then you have to pump. It will cost you substantially more. But in the normal circumstances, Dr. Hines, these farmers will have to have an overhead of about $85,000 to plant an acre of rice land. Now, from that acre, based on the current cost of paddy, it's about $3,300 a bag currently. That gives you for one acre, gives you something like it works out to $115,000 if I remember correctly. So when you do the math, when you extract the overhead cost, you're left with about $32,000 per acre. Now the small farmer who plants 5 acres, 10 acres, let's say 10 acres, for example, and most farmers are 5 and 4 acres and so small farmers, but let's say 10 acres, you will have for a crop about $300 and something thousand. But that is one crop for the year. You have 2 crops for the year, so that accounts for 6 months. So when you divide that per month, a farmer, one of these rice farmers, basically works for about $50,000, and that is below the minimum wage. Nobody in this country can survive with $50,000. You could not have survived with $50,000 years ago. And under these circumstances, with the high cost of living and the all that is happening now with COVID, etc., you definitely cannot survive on that $50,000. So that basically, in a nutshell, is the plight of the farmers and so many other Guyanese that are working for minimum wage in this country. That is where they are with it. But we have been constantly advocating and representing the poor, we're saying that there needs to be a shift. There needs to be greater focus on the poor, the working poor, the vulnerable, the disadvantaged, the single parents. All these persons are under strain because, for example, a single parent has to find someone to look after their child while they work, and most of them work for the minimum wage. And so this is the plight of the poor in this country. But somehow, the PPP doesn't get that, Dr. Hines. They don't get it.
Yes. Let me get you in here because your party is being stuck on the economic situation. What should the government be doing to help to cushion these rise in the prices of food? Kamraj?
Oh, sorry, I thought. Well, we came out. We have Juretta Finance,
Yeah.
and I had asked her to do the maths, as it is called, or do the economics of it for the subsidy for flour. Now, flour is basic for the roti man like myself and the bread man like sure, and so on. And it's needed across this country.
Kamraj, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm a roti man like you. But go ahead, sorry.
So she did a lovely little press release in which she argued the case that we import about 55,000 tons of wheaten flour. Well, we could bring that up to 60,000 tons for this year. That was last year. And the prices have gone up of $370 per ton. Right. So the difference with this 40% markup of wheat prices could now be taken care of by the oil monies that we would get as an increase from, and she put not the 140, but the 100 figure. That assuming that we get the $100 per barrel for oil, we would be making at least $30 more per barrel, because when we had computed the thing, Exxon and them, is $70, they had said. So it's a kind of a windfall. And she is saying, based on that, 1% of this oil windfall literally could take care of creating a subsidy for that wheaten flour, so that today the poor people, rich people could always pay heavy prices, but the poor people will still buy the bread and the flour literally at the same prices, rather than all this big jump that will now go up. Just like how Jack Day was indicating that because of the electricity charges and so on, now GPL said they got to spend about 40-50 million US dollars more. Where are they going to get it? He come up to say that, okay, he's going to ensure that the prices don't go up. Well, it's a subsidy he's creating for payment of that. Well, do it for bread. Do it for bread. That's roti. That is for wheat flour. And I am certain that he's going to take it from the oil monies. Take it from the oil monies. We have become blessed as a country with the oils that the production agreement that we signed on to in 2015. A lot of people cuss me for it. But it will come to save us now if that money is managed properly. And when you do the maths and when you do the economics of it, we could become a country that could pass through this real war time and COVID time and flood time and all of that better than most, because we will probably bring in about $1 billion this year from the oil money. And if you take a portion out of that, as they do now, because they just want to take the whole blasted amount, you just take a portion of it and you can make sure that the cost of living doesn't go up, at least for wheaten products. And then, of course, the electricity and the water rates that he talked about. We will, and let me say this, it requires a consensual thing in a parliament. We should bring this as a motion in parliament to help all Guyanese and all of us. We could support the PPP on how they must come and ensure, because this is a national crisis. As a matter of fact, it's because it's an international crisis that we are suffering from it. But because of being blessed with that oil deal or oil agreement, we could now come out of it. So we are asking for some subsidies. Plus, the other thing that we want is a lot of them big buys inside of the PPP there. and the contractor friends and all them, exporters of gold and all of that. It's a lot of money that they got that they have not paid into the coffers. When I went in there as public security member, I went to the State Department, and the State Department was telling me that how we got to give more information on who exporting cocaine and who are the bad johns and so on. I said, fine, we're going to do that, but I want some of the information of who carrying gold to America. And they give me all the information. And if you see the under declaration that is being made by some big people, and it's billions of US dollars that we lost as a result of that kind of under declaration. So, a little black boy snatch your chain at Stabrook Market, you want to kill him. But they got some big coolie man. Billions and billions of dollars. They're thieving, and they call that economics. It's a shame. And we could do well with that kind of money because we could now go and redistribute. They're the biggest tax dodgers and avoiders and evaders in this country are them rich PPP friends they got. They don't want even to pay the 2% withholding tax. They got to move that out and so on from contractors. And plenty of them don't declare themselves properly. All kinds of things they do. And we are not getting the amount of taxes that we are supposed to get. We were very happy that when we brought Stacia there, Stacia started because Stacia know the thing inside out. And we then start getting a lot more taxes from these same businessmen. Now, when the PPP was in there, nothing was happening. So we are being shortchanged on one side. And now with this international inflation, but with the oil monies and a better collection of our taxes, especially from the friends, families, and favorite, we can get enough money to look after ourselves in this time of crisis. And I want us to open a big debate in Parliament on that. The PPP should allow it, and so on. But you get a speaker there now. I see motion and so on. It is not meant. So these are some of the projections and these policies that we have spoken about.
Takuma, this is an area that your party has taken interest in. What should be done to deal with the rising prices?
Okay, the WPA believe we want to say upfront, we don't mind the government introducing short-term measures to deal with the immediate impact of the rising prices of food items. But the WPA feels that since the forces that unleash these inflationary pressures, the COVID, the Ukraine war, Russian war, and the consequences that it creates for the global economy in all its manifestations, may be with us, okay, for some time. We don't see that something will disappear, even the war stop in Ukraine this month end. We don't think that the consequences of the war, the economic consequences of the war, would end or readjust itself significantly enough that countries like Guyana would not feel the impact of the war and the COVID in terms of its inflationary pressures. So for the WPA, we are more concerned with increasing the working people base wages. We believe that the government should use this crisis to have an engagement with the trade union movement to discuss a livable wage for the Guyanese working people in the context of the pandemic, the war, and in the context of oil. So while we are supportive of any measure, and a lot of measures were identified by my colleagues, so I don't want to go over them. We will be very supportive of it. But we see that those are short-term measures, okay? But what we consider is more profound measures. And for us, increases in wages and salaries for the workers, we believe is the best response to give the workers the kind of security, income security and food security the family will need in this ongoing conflict situation. So for the Working People's Alliance, our emphasis is to increase workers' wages and salaries now. And we call on the government to have this discourse with the trade unions. And we call on the trade unions to use this moment, as trade union movements all over the world is using the pandemic and the war, given the increases in prices that is destroying the livelihood of working people, to force a renegotiation of incomes for people. And we believe that in the context of Guyana, that is the more profound way to go, because when people have predictable and stable wages, not only are they able to buy the things that they want to keep themselves and family alive, but they may be able, with good management, to scrape off some capital to reinvest in productive activities, small productive activities, which will generate more wealth for them and more income. So we not buy onto these short-term solutions. This crisis opened the door for profound response to the plight of the working people, particularly since the Guyanese workers have been under this protracted, starvation wages. We believe that this is the moment to have it addressed.
Thank you very much, Takum Ogunse, Emerald Ramjatan of the AFC, Ogunse of the WPA, and Sherwin Older of the PNC tonight, talking about what their party is doing and the party's reaction to the immediate problems. Gentlemen, thank you so much. We've gone over time, but it was time well spent. Thank you so much. And tomorrow night, I'm going to have on the two female candidates for leadership in the Guyana Teachers Union, Vanessa Kitsoon, running for president, for the presidency of the GTU, and Coretta McDonald wants to be retained as the general secretary. Politics 101 has endorsed these two candidates, and we are urging teachers out there to vote for these candidates. But of course, we're going to bring them on tomorrow night for them to speak to the general public and to the teachers and to tell us what they intend to do. Tomorrow night, Vanessa Kitsoon, Coretta McDonald, thank you all so much for staying with us. See you tomorrow night.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.